Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Morty and Glory video. In today's episode we are going to be taking a look at the Knights in Shining Armor of the Imperial Guard, the Tank Aces. Tank Aces are a brilliant way of being able to get more fluff and flavour into your army, whilst at the same time unlocking some pretty powerful abilities as well. However, not all tank aces are created equally, and the purpose of this video is to go through each one of the tank aces available in the 9th edition Warhammer 40k Astra Militarum Codex and review which ones are good, bad, and downright ugly. And so, without further ado, let's crush the enemy beneath our iron treads and dive right into today's episode. So first off, what the hell are tank aces? You might be flicking through your codex trying to find a unit entry or datasheet talking about what the hell these things are. Well, they're not actually separate units in your army. They're in fact paid upgrades. You can buy these upgrades for your battle tanks and super heavies, and when you do, you will get a cool extra ability for that unit. This means that in order for you to unlock the ability to take a tank ace, you are going to need to pay the points for the original unit first. So for example, if you want to turn your Leman Russ into a tank ace, you're going to have to pay about 150 points for the base tank and then pay for the tank ace ability on top. This system is actually very common in Warhammer 40k. For example, the Space Marines get chapter command upgrades. This is where you can improve your captain up to a chapter master. You can turn a chaplain into a master of sanctity, or one of the most popular ones, you can turn an apothecary into a chief apothecary, making them even better at healing. However, what I find really cool about the guard tank aces is you don't need to use these on your tank commanders. You can actually make a standard Leman Russ a tank ace. Of course, you can make a tank commander a tank ace as well, and many people will do, as it does sometimes just feel right that your tank commander is the ace after all. But when it comes to a competitive point of view, sometimes it's not always the right choice to make the tank commander the tank ace. If all of this seems a little confusing, it's very simple. Think of tank ace upgrades as like buying extra weapons for your tanks. It's no different to putting an extra couple of heavy bolts on the side or storm bolter and armor tracks on your vehicle. It's a paid upgrade, and when you buy it, you get an extra ability for your tank. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty detail of each individual tank ace, there are just two other small points I want to make you aware of. Firstly, each tank can only have one ace. I know it would be really cool to take that really old 20-year-old Leman Russ that you've got in your collection. Maybe you've had it as part of your army since you first got into 40k as a young child. But sadly, for the purposes of the rules, GW says you can only have one tank ace on each tank. You can take loads of tank aces. So if you want to take 3 or 4 different Leman Russes and give them each their own tank ace, you can absolutely do that. But you can't stack 4 or 5 tank ace abilities onto a single vehicle. Also, if you are a returning player to the game and perhaps you have encountered tank aces before in the old 8th edition book, The Greater Good, they are a little different in the new 9th edition codex. Previously, tank aces were broken down into support aces and main battle tank aces and a couple of other categories. That has all gone now. Unfortunately, there are no tank aces for your artillery, your sentinels, your hellhounds, or anything like that. Straight up, you can only put tank aces on battle tanks and super heavy units. This means that all of your different Bane Blades can get tank ace abilities, and your Leman Russes and your Rogel Dawns, but those are the only 3 data sheets that can get access to it. Also, just a small side note, tank aces do have 2 different points costs. It will cost you a different amount to put a tank ace on a regular battle tank than it will to put it on a super heavy. Super heavy tank aces tend to cost a little bit more. This is in line with the fact that they are bigger vehicles. They're going to come with more firepower. They're probably going to get more out of the tank ace. But it is going to make an already pretty hefty investment even more pricey. So that is something to be aware of. But with all of that said, now let's get into the deep dive and take a look at the individual tank ace upgrades. Starting off, we have Vaunted Praetorian, and this is a pretty good one. You can put this tank ace on a super heavy or Rogel Dawn battle tank. That means you can't put it on a Leman Russ. This model then gains the officer keyword and knows mechanized orders. In your command phase, it can issue one order, and if this model is a super heavy model, the unit you can select for the order can be an Astra Militarum Titanic unit. All other rules for issuing orders still apply. Generally speaking, there are two ways you're going to want to use this tank ace. Firstly, you're going to use it on your super heavies. Frankly, it is the easiest and cheapest way of being able to get orders for your Baneblade, Shadow Sword, or other big bad tank. Normally, your Titanic units cannot receive orders from your standard tank commander. I don't know if they don't have any respect for the little tanks. Maybe it's a size matters thing. Perhaps all the tanks are crewed by orcs and they only respect the biggest one. I don't know. But normally, your Titanic units cannot receive orders from your regular leg tank commanders. But Vaunted Praetorian is an easy way around this problem by essentially putting a tank commander inside a Baneblade. The new Baneblade tank commander can issue orders to other tanks around it, just like a regular Leman Russ commander can, or more importantly, it can actually issue orders to itself. The tank ace specifically says you may issue orders to Titanics even though you normally can't. Well, guess what? The Baneblade with the Vaunted Praetorian tank ace is a super heavy, and therefore it is eligible to receive its own order. It's a great way of being able to get something like Gunner's Kill on sight onto your super heavy, so finally have a reliable source of reroll ones for that big centerpiece unit. Being honest with you guys, this is probably the most common way that people use Vaunted Praetorian. They want to get some orders for their big super heavy unit. But, in my opinion, there's actually a bigger brain, more tactical way of making use of this ace. By putting this tank ace on a Rogel Dawn battle tank, you are essentially gaining an extra normal tank commander in your army. And in Arcs of Omen and the Arcs of Omen detachments, that's actually really important. Because the HQ slots in an Arcs of Omen detachment are very heavily contested in a guard army. We've got officers, command squads, tank commanders, and all sorts of other things that really want to compete for those 4 top slots. Often that means that many guard armies are going into battle and they've only got one source of mechanized orders. They've got a single tank commander in there because they're looking at taking a couple of commandants and maybe a command squad as well. By putting Vaunted Praetorian on a Rogel Dawn, you are essentially gaining an extra tank commander for 15 points. This gives you 2 sources of mechanized orders. It allows you to spread your tanks out a little bit more rather than having to cram them all around that lone tank commander who's trying to hand out as many orders as he can each turn. On top of this, like the Baneblade, the Rogel Dawn Praetorian can actually order himself. He has the squadron keyword, and if he does order himself, that actually does splash over to the other tanks around him, because again, he has a squadron keyword and mechanized orders splash to other tanks that also have squadron. Taking all of this into account, I have given Vaunted Praetorian a solid 7 out of 10. The reason I've taken a few points off it is, firstly, you can't put it on a Leman Russ. This would be where it would be most useful. Being able to get a cheap extra tank commander in your army would be fantastic. Therefore, you're going to have to put this tank ace on already rather expensive units like the Rogel Dawn, like the Baneblade. On top of this, whilst it's good, it's certainly not mandatory. Not only could you end up taking multiple tank commanders if you wanted to, but also you could simply end up spending a CP and giving one of your infantry officers the ability to do mechanized orders via superior tactical training. But next up, we have got Meticulous Calibrator, and this is one of the best tank aces you can get in your army. Meticulous Calibrator is very straightforward. Each time this model makes a ranged attack, the target does not receive the benefits of cover against that attack. Straight up, this tank ace ability allows you to ignore both light cover and dense cover that your opponent might be benefiting from. This is so nice. One of the big problems that the guards suffer with is having to deal with those -1 to hit modifiers that seem to be so prevalent in competitive 40k boards these days. There always seems to be forests placed over every single firing lane, every single choke point, and it really does impact our army quite a lot because we are primarily a shooting focused faction. In my opinion, there are 2 really good targets for Meticulous Calibrator. Either a Leman Russ tank commander with the Gatekeeper relic or a Rogel Dawn battle tank with the full Daka Dawn loadout. Both of these tanks are going to be the primary damage dealers of your army, and anything that you can do to improve the amount of hurt that they are throwing downrange is only a good thing. I have personally used Meticulous Calibrator on both of these tanks, and I can tell you that it was a glorious display of Imperial might. The last time that I used a Rogel Dawn with this loadout in a single game, not only did it completely smash a Hecaton land fortress, but it also picked up a full squad of the Votan Exosuit Warriors as well, and it didn't even break a sweat. Simple to use, easy to understand, and useful in every single game. Meticulous Calibrator gets an easy 9 out of 10 from me. Next on stage, we have the Mechanical Pack Rat tank case. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say something pretty controversial. I actually don't think Mechanical Pack Rat is very good. I know straight away that a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that. But hear me out. You see, what Mechanical Pack Rat does is each time an attack is made against this model, an unmodified wound roll of a 1 to 3 for that attack fails, irrespective of any abilities that the weapon or the model making the attack may have. Essentially, it's putting transhuman physiology on your Leman Russ battle tank, Rogel Dawn, or Baneblade. Now, on paper, this sounds really, really good. I mean, oh my god, I can never be wounded on better than a 4+. So much anti-tank firepower is going to bounce off my gleaming, magnificent hull. But your tanks are already incredibly durable. Your Baneblade and your Rogel Dawns are rocking toughness 9. That means if someone hits you with a las cannon, they're still only wounding you on 4s. And for most armies, the best anti-tank guns they can take typically cap out at strength 9, las cannons and las cannon equivalents. It's only when someone starts bringing the big old lance weapons on Imperial Knights that maybe you would wish you had Mechanical Pack Rat, but that's a rare instance, and most people aren't going to be bringing those kind of weapons to the tabletop. So outside of a few very special weapons, it's a useless upgrade for your big tanks. It has some more play on the Leman Russ. You know, when you do come across those las cannon equivalents, it is going to be nice to have that Mechanical Pack Rat, don't get me wrong. But in my experience, at most tournaments and in most games that I play, the most common anti-tank weapon that I come across is not the las cannon. It's the melter gun or the melter equivalent. Out of all of the games I've played, across all the events I've attended, the most common strength that gets leveled against my Leman Russes is strength 8, be it in close combat or at range. Maybe it's a melter gun, or a Harlequin fusion pistol, or an Eradicator melter rifle, or an Eldar lance, or a Dark Elder dark lance, or maybe we're in combat and now we're looking at Marines with power fists and thunderhammers. I constantly come across armies that are fielding strength 8 weapons. We're talking in vast generalizations here, but it tends to be those armies which really focus on shooting, which bring guns which have got a bit more than strength 8. Guard, Tau, some of the different Space Marine chapters, they're the ones that are likely to turn up to the board with lots of las cannons or higher strength weapons. But for most factions that are a little bit more balanced, that do a little bit of combat, a little bit of shooting, a little bit of movement, they tend to have weapons that don't quite reach into those strength 9 or strength 10 areas. And so because of this, I see Mechanical Pack Rat as a little bit superfluous. It's pretty situational. You'll find that in some games, you'll be pretty grateful that you had it, but in very few games is it going to be the tank case that won you or lost you the game by not taking it. Taking all of this into account, I've given Mechanical Pack Rat a 4 out of 10 because I don't think that it's useless. I just think that in most scenarios, you're not going to feel the ability. But when we are on the bottom, the only way is up. And now we're going to look at my favorite tank case, which is Veteran Commandeer. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I love this tank case. It's my personal favorite. I've given it a straight up 10 out of 10. And I'm going to be honest, I'm a little bit biased. Some people watching this video who are pretty competitive are going to see that I've given Veteran Commandeer a slightly higher score than Meticulous Calibrator. And they're going to be like, Mordian Glory, what the hell are you on about? Honestly, I don't necessarily disagree with those people. I think that Meticulous Calibrator can be the most take all come as one of them. But I just think that Veteran Commandeer in the right build is an absolute auto-include. Out of all of them, it is the only one that I auto-include in pretty much every proper guard army that I take. When I'm a little short on points, I will drop Meticulous Calibrator. When I'm a little short on points, I don't ever drop Veteran Commandeer. Now, I understand that I really hyped this bad boy up now. I get it. I understand that. You guys are going to want to know what the hell it does. It basically allows you to take an extra regimental doctrine on your tank. And some of you are going to be going, is that it? What's so good about that? Well, it's about which regimental doctrine you pick, and it's about what weapon you pair with that. Most competitive guard armies are going to take Born Soldiers. That's the regimental doctrine that is just straight up the best. But Born Soldiers doesn't pair well with some of the best guns we have in our army, namely the Vanquisher Cannon. Now, the Vanquisher Cannon is probably the best turret you can get for the guard. It only has one weakness. It fires one shot. It's a hell of a shot. Don't get me wrong. It's probably the biggest, baddest shot we've got in the Codex, and that's including the Godspear Death Strike missile. It's a massive whopping strength 14. It's AP -5. It does damage. I think it's 6 plus D3, and then on top of that, it does D3 mortal wounds. Oh yeah, and your opponent can't use invulnerable saves against it. If you hit with the Vanquisher Cannon, you are just going to blast the ever-living piss out of whatever you smash it into. But that's the key thing, right? You got to hit with it. And a Leman Russ only has a ballistic skill of 4+, and even with the turret weapon, your Vanquisher Cannon's only hitting on a 3. That means 33% of the time, it misses. And 6% of the time, it works every time. But those odds, they don't really make sense. So how do you fix that? Well, you could take loads and loads of Vanquishers in your army, and then you could take the Elite Sharpshooters Regimental Doctrine across your army, and that would work, but then you're missing out on Born Soldiers, and Born Soldiers is really good. So we want a Vanquisher Cannon that can get the benefits of Elite Sharpshooters, which is where you get a free reroll to hit, but also keep Born Soldiers for the rest of the army. How do we do that? Well, we use Veteran Commandeer. Out of all of your Leman Russes, one of them with a Vanquisher Cannon. You then upgrade that to be a Veteran Commandeer, and the extra regimental doctrine that you pick is Elite Sharpshooters. This allows your Vanquisher Cannon every turn to get an inbuilt reroll to hit, and that means it is much more likely to connect with the enemy every single turn, and if it hits, it nearly always hurts. I've actually done a video on this tactic, and I go into a lot of detail on it, and what I'll do is I'll make sure to link it in the end screen of this video. But moving on to the next tank ace, what goes up must come down. And we now have to take a look at Knight of Piety. This ace is actually one of the most common ones that I see people taking. And that's because it gives your tank a 5+ invulnerable save, and you also get a 5+ shrug against mortal wounds. A lot of longbeards in the guard community still think that if Russes could just get an invulnerable save, they'd be the bestest unit in the whole codex. This was true back in the day when we only had a 3+ armor save and we didn't have as many wounds as we have now. But the times have moved on. They are changing. And the Russ now has a 2+ save, which means whenever you get hit by an AP -3 weapon, which tends to be one of the more common anti-tank APs that you come across, you got a 5+ save anyway. So Knight of Piety isn't really doing all that much for you. On top of that, it's pretty bloody expensive. It's one of the most expensive ones you can take on a normal Leman Russ, and it is the second most expensive upgrade you can put on a Super Heavy, with it being 25 points and 35 points respectively. And it's this rather high price point that kind of exposes the Achilles heel of the Knight of Piety. Because for 15 points more, you could take a Regimental Engine Seer. And the Regimental Engine Seer is infinitely more useful. Firstly, he puts a 5+ invulnerable save on your tank as well. Amazing. Secondly, he also heals D3 wounds. You know what's better than not taking damage? Trolling your opponent by healing any damage that they do on your tank anyway. And lastly, he is a separate unit, so he has loads of extra tactical battlefield roles, like being able to hold objective, raise banners, and all sorts of other cool things. But I hear you say, Mordian Glory, what about the other part of Knight of Piety? You can ignore those mortal wounds on a 5+? Oh, how devious. True, but if you're taking mortal wounds on a tank, then 9 times out of 10, something's gone horribly wrong, because the most common source of mortal wounds are psychic powers. And the majority of psychic powers that do mortal wounds have to target the nearest unit. And in a normal Imperial Guard army, your Leman Russes should never be the nearest unit. You should always be screening them with infantry. Therefore, you are very unlikely to actually feel the benefit of the, oh, I don't care about mortal wounds side of the tank case. Because more often than not, it's going to be the poor bloody infantry in front of the tank that are getting their brains melted from the enemy mine bullets. Having said all that, Knight of Piety does have its use in two small scenarios. Firstly, it's good in lower point games. If you are playing 1,000 points or less, you might not be able to afford the luxury of spending the extra 15 points for the regimental engine seer, but you still want that 5+ invulnerable save on one of your tanks. Fair enough, in that situation, taking the Knight of Piety isn't actually too bad. Or you might find yourself playing in a 2,000 point game, but with a full tank company. 10 or 11 Leman Russes charging across the battlefield, crushing the enemy beneath their iron might. And in that scenario, having a Knight of Piety isn't too bad at all, because you're not going to have the screens against the mortal wounds, and being able to upgrade one of your tanks to have a 5+ invulnerable save isn't too bad. I mean, if you took 3 Tech Priest Engines and Knight of Piety, you could probably get almost half your tanks in your company with an invulnerable save. And, well, that's not something you should turn your nose up at if you are an armoured commander. But taking everything into account, I'm going to give Knight of Piety a 4 out of 10. It's similar to Mechanical Pack Rat. It's situational. There will be certain lists that benefit from it. There'll be certain size games that will benefit from it. There will be that one game you play where it was absolutely clutch that you could ignore that mortal wound on a 5+. I get it. But tank aces and abilities in general that are only good in certain scenarios don't make for an auto-include. And as a result, I'm giving it a lower score. But this episode's a bit of a roller coaster because we've just gone down into the dip and now it's time to go back up again to Master of Camouflage, the penultimate tank ace that we are going to be reviewing today. This tank ace focuses on increasing the durability of your vehicle, and it does it by granting the vehicle light cover. All those little bits of twig and stuff that are sticking off the top of the Leman Russ, they are going to allow you to get light cover on your vehicle. Now, if you are a battle tank, as long as you're over 12 inches away from the enemy, you're going to get that cover bonus. However, if you're in a Titanic unit, you have to be over 18 inches away. Combined with the fact that you've got to pay more for it on a super heavy, and that you have to be further away, I think this one isn't a very good one for your Bane Blades. But for your normal MBTs, this definitely has some play. Even against those units that have the ability to maybe deep strike in, get up close and personal, and maybe do some damage to you, you still should be able to find it relatively easy to keep your vehicles over 12 inches away from the vast majority of incoming fire. That means against the majority of shots, your Leman Russ isn't going to have a 2+ save, it's going to have a 1+ save. And there is nothing stopping you stacking this with all manner of other defensive buffs that you can pile onto your battle tank. Straight up, you could pay for armor tracks as well. That gives you another +1 save against damage 1 weapons. Suddenly, against small arms fire, you're on like a 0-up save. Now, of course, you still fail your save on a 1. A 1 is always a fail. But it means if someone hits you with a load of high AP but low damage weapons, you're still more than likely going to be rocking that 2-up save. You can also combine this with some stratagems. So, for example, you could just straight up go for smokescreen. Now you've got another -1 to hit modifier on top of that. But more interestingly, you could combine this and armored tracks with ablative plating. Ablative plating is a 2 CP stratagem, and it reduces the incoming damage of an attack by 1. Now, this combines with armored tracks. Because if you're getting shot at with, let's say, an overcharged plasma gun that is strength 8, AP -3, damage 2, suddenly that becomes damage 1. Armored tracks pop this little head up and goes, oh, you're a damage 1 attack now. My Leman Russ gets +1 save against that. And then your Massive Camouflage goes, oh, but I'm also in light cover. So suddenly that AP -3 attack from the plasma gun has essentially become AP -1 because of all the extra modifiers that you're piling onto it. So even if someone shoots you with like a plasma gun or a similar AP -3 damage 1 kind of weapon, you're still on a 3-up save. Another likely scenario is if someone is shooting you with Iron Hands. Iron Hands are one of the most popular Space Marine chapters. In fact, they've always been one of the most competitive Space Marine chapters out there. If you want to collect Space Marines and you want to make sure that you're always going to have some relevancy on the tournament scene in every single edition, you can do a lot worse than picking Iron Hands. Now, they love their heavy weapons. They love their heavy bolters. Because those heavy bolters, when they're in Devastator Doctrine, are AP -2, and they're going to be 2 damage. And if they're shooting into your normal tank, then they're going to turn your 2-up save into a 4-up save, and then the damage 2 is going to start quickly chipping off loads of wounds from your Leman Russ. But if an Iron Hands player tries to go in against a massive camouflage Armored Trax Rogel Dawn or Leman Russ, they're going to quickly find that it doesn't matter that they've got damage to it, because you're going to make that damage 1. Doesn't matter that AP -2. You're basically going to make it AP 0 because you're going to get that +1 save from the armor tracks and the cover save from Master of Camouflage. Suddenly, against all those deadly Iron Hands heavy bolters, you are having a great time. You're still on that 2-up save. But to summarize this and condense it down to put it into really simple, easy to understand terms, it's like putting Armor of Contempt back on a Leman Russ. In the majority of cases, it basically means that you're just getting -1 AP against all incoming attacks. However, before you all go out there and start green stuffing a bunch of camo netting onto your Leman Russes, Massive Camouflage is good, but it's not great. The problem with it is that it doesn't actually give you Armor of Contempt. It doesn't actually reduce the incoming AP of an attack. It gives you light cover. And there are a lot of factions out there, or a lot of units out there, that have the ability to ignore light cover. Hell, you go up against Votan, they're going to light your Leman Russ up like a Christmas tree with all their searchlights. They're going to use their scanners. You're not going to get any kind of cover against those things. And it is because of this, the fact it is not infallible, the fact the enemy can counter it, that I've given it a decent score, but not a particularly top tier score of 7 out of 10. It's definitely a tank case that you can include in your army, and in many games you'll get some use out of it, but you'll certainly notice it when you come across an opponent that has no problem dealing with cover. And so we come to our final tank case, Steel Commissar. Now, I'm going to be real with you. This is probably by far the worst tank case from a competitive point of view. There is almost no reason to ever put this thing in your army. It does have some minor tactical play, but that's not the reason you're taking the Steel Commissar. You're taking it because it is cool AF. It is probably the most badass tank case you can take. Because essentially, you are turning your regular ass Leman Russ into a goddamn Commissar tank. You're going to have a chap leaning out of the top with a bolt pistol and a power sword shouting, "Drive me closer! I want to hit them with my sword!" You will be able to embody one of the oldest, most awesome and venerable guard memes of all time. And that is the only reason people take Steel Commissar. It's just for the aesthetic. It's just for the meme. It's for the dream. Unfortunately, like I said, it's not actually very good. And if you're going into a tournament, there's almost no reason to ever take this. It's probably the only one on this list that if you had to twist my arm, I'd give like a 1 out of 10. But for the sake of completeness, I will take you through the rules now. Firstly, you can only give this to a tank commander. You can't give it to a basic Leman Russ. Secondly, it allows the tank commander to know Perfector's orders in addition to the mechanized orders. In your command phase, it can issue 1 Perfector's order in addition to 1 mechanized order. When this model issues a Perfector's order, the unit you select for that order can be an infantry officer or abhuman unit, but in such cases, the regimental tactics ability does not apply. It's pretty cool that you get the Perfector's order in addition. I mean, it would be like negative score if you could only do the Perfector's order instead of your mechanized order. That would just be terrible. Or you only got 1 order either way. So it's nice that you get an additional order. I'll give it that. But to be honest, I'm just here looking at this thing going, what's the point? What is the point? Why wouldn't I just put superior tactical training on a command squad and go for Perfector's orders that way? It cost me 0 points. Cost me a CP instead. And remember what we were talking about earlier about how you tend to find that you run out of points before you run out of CP. This is still the case when it comes to Steel Commissar. So I can have infinite range or 24-inch range Perfector's orders from my command squad with superior tactical training. Or why wouldn't I just take a Commissar? You know, this tank could be targeted. It can be blown up. And a big badass black painted tank driving across the board is definitely going to draw a lot of attention from your opponent. It's a big shoot me symbol. Whereas a regular Commissar can just run around be character protected, and do the Perfector's Orders if he needs to. And this is the crazy thing. Steel Commissar is really expensive. It's 25 points. Honestly, it should be 10, 15 points. It should just be a nice, fun little upgrade that a lot of people chuck onto their armies just because it's cool. But by it being 25 points, it's just unusable. A bit like with Knight of Piety, why wouldn't I just spend 15 points more and get a Commissar who's a separate unit who can do all of the things that the Steel Commissar can do, but also can be more tactically flexible, raising banners and doing other stuff, and also doing his Commissar thing where he can pass morale and stuff like that. The one very, very niche thing it has going for it is the fact that you can order an infantry officer with the Perfector's Order. But there are few times when that scenario is ever going to come up. Perfector's Orders are extremely situational as it is. You will use them in some games, you will not use them in others. They are good to have in the back pocket, but if you go through 2 or 3 games at a tournament and never use one, I wouldn't be surprised. So the fact that you get this very situational order, and then you get this even more specific situation that you can use it in on these infantry officers, it just doesn't work. If it could do regimentals, if I could tell my command squad to take aim, or to fix bayonets, or to take cover, that would be infinitely more useful. But Perfector's Orders on a command squad rarely come up. The only 2 scenarios off the top of my head that make me think it would be worthwhile is you could remain vigilant with the Dreadnought, so you push forward with a really tough command squad with a not Dead Dog or an Ogre Bodyguard, and you push enemy deep strikers back. That might work. Or if you find yourself in a scenario where you could really do with a bit of OBSEC, and you can be like, you command squad, count as being objective secured at all costs, go and take that objective. That's the other scenario that you could do. But again, it's just not likely to come up. So I think overall, the Steel Commissar it's probably one of my favorite tank aces just because of that rule of cool. But there's nothing stopping you from just painting one of your Lehman Russes up as, in the classic Commissar black color scheme. There's nothing stopping you from modeling a Commissar sticking out the top of it. You don't actually have to pay the Steel Commissar to get your Steel Commissar vibes. Overall, if I was to summarize my opinion on tank aces, if I was to give you a Mordian hot take, I would say that tank aces on the whole are great. They are a fantastic mechanic, and I'm really glad that Games Workshop included them in the new codex. They are a great way of adding fun and flavor into your army, but at the same time, you can really give some of your units power boosts. I do think it also offers loads of modeling opportunities as well. I mean, having a Steel Commissar tank is pretty straightforward, but having a Knight of Piety, having one with loads of Aquillas all over it, just having a gold paint scheme on one would be amazing. Going for a mechanical pack rat and having all of these little gizmos and maybe some AdMech little bits added onto it would be really cool. Going for that Vaunted Praetorian, having a tank commander sticking out the top and giving him proper epaulets and a big fancy hat. And of course, massive camouflage, you could really embrace your sort of World War II German Panzer Division vibes and have your King Tigers or your Lehman Russes or Rogel Dawns in this case running around with loads of bits of twig and bits of foliage or camo netting sticking off them. And you could even go for something like a mechanical pack rat. You could go for the side skirts as well, and a meticulous calibrator could be the one that has the AdMech bits instead. There's loads of modeling opportunities for the hobbyist. There's loads of flavor and fun to add for the narrative player, and there's loads of power to add for the competitive player. There's literally a tank case for all the different guard players out there. If you are thinking of taking them competitively though, they are good, but make sure you're not just chucking them in your list willy-nilly. Make sure you have a game plan for them. Are you realistically getting the most use out of Veteran Commandeer? Are you realistically making the best use out of Meticulous Calibrator? Just have a little think about what you're doing with them, but as long as you have a solid game plan and you've built a tactic around them, most of them are pretty usable on the tables. And with all that said, we're going to wrap up today's video. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. What is your favorite tank case and what is your least favorite tank case? If you've enjoyed today's video, then make sure you smash that like button like you're going to smash through the enemy lines with your iron spearhead of Russes. And also subscribe to never miss an episode. If you have found today's video particularly fun or informative, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. One of the big perks of becoming a supporter is you gain access to the Mordian Glory Discord server. This is an online community with over 1,000 active members. It's really exploded over the last 6 months, and it's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for tactics, army lists, strategy, hobbying, painting, and we've even got a pretty fun and spicy meme section as well. In fact, I'd just like to take a small moment to say a big thank you to the latest channel members. So thank you to Jesse Burnett, Wimmy Wham, Brandon Dubin, Brian Moore, Martin Loring, Hadrian, Ben Price, Spencer Smith, Quincy Kunz, Ray Toiler, Ventress Dark, The Bandit Cat, Jimmy Hansen, The Ill-Tempered Fagblade, and Legions Games. Thank you guys for doing your part. I also want to give a shout out to the latest Patreon supporters as well. So a big thank you to Jack Attack, Atin, Blark, Nowglutter, Steel X Spider, Tiki the Hut, Zabras, Mark Allen, and Mr. Weejol. And last but certainly not least, I would like to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bonbon Vert, Mark Panconi, Ridemaster 134-4, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, Zabras, Alex Dengal, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, Tao Tom, and Slyvani, the one-man super chatting army. Thank you to all of you guys. Your generous support, it makes a huge difference, and I am eternally grateful to every single one of you. I hope you've all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.